Goed. So this session will be in English. Welcome everybody to the session Jumping the Box. I am your moderator, Aldit Hunkar. It's been mentioned many times today. Today's theme is redefine. We try to explore the things that happen when the definitions and the boundaries of work, self, and the other are redefined. Now, often enough, creative professionals limit themselves by thinking they are just one thing. They are either a filmmaker or a writer or a producer. It's becoming more common for professionals to embody several professions within one field, but it's not very often that somebody works outside of those borders. So NFF wants to break these limitations, and in this session, Jumping the Box, we welcome 3 professionals who are active within the interactive and/or filmmaking industry, but who also work outside of that spectrum in totally different positions. Now, how does that outside life influence them and their work, specifically in film and interactive? What can be gained from having your feet planted firmly both inside and outside the industry? So let's ask our panels, starting with Ashley Backus-Clark. Welcome, Ashley. You are a multidisciplinary artist and molecular and cellular biologist. Now that's a combination. Tell us all about it.
Okay, so hello, everyone. I started off my career as a molecular biologist, so I did stem cell research for about 6 years and decided that I didn't want to spend all of my time in lab with mice. I was much more interested in art history, storytelling. So I took some time off and decided to, kind of do a little tour around Europe. And here I found my voice as a storyteller. And when I went back to the US, I decided that I wanted to figure out how to put that into practice. So I got into branding and marketing and worked in that field for a really long time. And from there, it kind of stroked my interest in going back into science. So I looked at neuroscience and wanted to figure out how branding and marketing sort of fit within the world of neuroscience and how we make decisions, how our brains are triggered when we really resonate with the brand that is trying to speak to us. So I did that for a while. And it kind of led me into the world of experiential marketing and using new and immersive technologies and new media to tell stories. So I'll be talking a little bit about a project that I recently worked on. I think you can see the image of it here.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this project is called Neurospeculative Afrofeminism, and it's a 3-part project that looks at product design, virtual reality, installation design. And it was really a way for me to kind of be immersed in the world of art, but do it through more of a lens of branding and marketing and storytelling, and also looking at how science connects to the world of virtual reality. So the project started I have a friend who started an interactive design studio when she was in an architecture program, and we always, would bounce ideas off of each other and really wanted to figure out how to create something together. So we were living together in New York, and we decided that in response to some of the issues that are going on in the U.S. with regards to the killing of unarmed black men, that we wanted to create a project that was about empowerment and looking at black beauty rituals to figure out how we can create a different narrative around it. So we created these fashion objects, which started with a scarf right here, and we created the physical working prototypes of all of these things, but this is just a render. But this scarf confuses computer vision algorithms, so it's a counter-surveillance tool. And when you put it on, the camera can't discern between the faces on the scarf and your own face. So if you're using, like Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook and using a filter, that process can't discern between the faces on the scarf and your own face. Next, you can go to the next slide. We wanted to tie in neuroscience, so we created this story around sort of black hair rituals. So we built this physical hair salon, and you go in there and you think you're going to get your hair done, but you're really going to get your brain optimized. So you go in there and you put on the VR headset, and you're in the built physical space. And when you put the headset on, you're transported into the same the digital space. And you go through this story where you meet Brooks, the next slide, who is a world-renowned neuroscientist, and she has gotten herself into some trouble, so she had to go into hiding. And these hair salons are really a covert operation where she has built this technology where she's capturing the dreams and memories of women in her community because they had to go into exile. And so in this story, you become a character. You're embodied in the body of a character, and you go through the story in her body, and you sort of lose the body at one point. But we have been working with a lot of researchers that are using the tools of VR to see what it means to be immersed in storytelling and how that can cause the pathways in your brain to really think that you're there, even if you're in a virtual space. And so next, we created these new deities that are, looking at new ways of looking at black women who are in positions of power and building a new American mythology. So using some of the scenic representations of Afrofeminism and black sci-fi to create this new space. We're really looking at how a cultural phenomenon like Star Wars or Black Panther has put tools of empowerment within youth who don't necessarily see themselves in this technology. And if you can just click through the other slides. These are some of the images of some of the deities that you meet. And if you guys are ever in Eindhoven, we have this installation up at Moo Art Space, and it'll be there until the 6th. So you can, I don't have too many visuals of what the installation looks like, but if you go there, you can see the full thing built out. And the next slide, I have a trailer from the experience.
Thank you, Ashley. Moving on to Michael Middelkoop, sitting right next to me. He is a director and a writer of children's books. That to me sounds a bit more one of the same, but maybe it isn't.
It's I think less out of the box than what I'm hearing here. But I think the motivations behind it were completely different and are actually stemming from different creative routes. So I'm Michael, born in Rotterdam, raised in Amsterdam, which is already a contradiction if you're from this country. But so I'm a director. I direct commercials and music videos mainly, and those are my roots. That's where I started. I'm just going to show some different stills of my work. And these last 2-3 years, I moved more into a route of fiction. I wanted to make more long narrative stories, and one of the ways in which I started doing this was staying close to the same culture of music videos and commercials, which is more youth. So I created this web series about stalkers, which are guys who, vakkenvullers, which was for me a great project in which I enjoyed a lot of freedom in the public domain. So it's not for a commercial client, it's not for music, it's not for for-profit product. It's more a creative product for people to view and enjoy. And I really enjoyed doing that. And next to that, I felt I wanted to develop myself more with more personal narratives, because I think as a filmmaker, and there are a lot of discussions around the festival about this as well, is navigating the field between commercially viable work and just your authorship. And this was one of the first projects where I was able to combine staying really true to my roots, but also being able to make something that really captures an audience. and I try to keep doing that in my narrative. So the still you saw of the old guy that we just skipped is one of my latest films. It's a film called Snore, which is mustache, and this already set me into veering even more away from commercial work and doing more personal work and still finding an audience, because this is actually a film based on my mother, who lives in Rotterdam and who's really fighting against the gentrification of her neighborhood. It's in Amsterdam we've already lost everything to the rich people. No, I'm joking, but it's true. In Rotterdam there are still many neighborhoods that are maybe in the position where some neighborhoods in Amsterdam were 10, 15 years ago. And this actually follows the story of one single guy who's still fighting against the changes in the city, which actually becomes a metaphor for him not being able to resolve some issues of his past. And it was actually when I was writing and creating this film, and then you go through the film fund and you start writing why you're doing this, I started to get really personally attached to, on the one hand, finding an audience, on the other hand, making really personal stories that you really want to get out there. And one of the things I kept stumbling upon is that I always try to bring in the other in my stories, whether it's being black, being an old guy. I always try to find people that are not really within the norm, and it's very much a funny narrative, but I always try to find that. And in that search, I started to figure out, isn't there something I can do more? You know, you always get this moment as a creative that you really want to change something. Well, I'm just a creative, so I couldn't do that much, but I did think that a problem for me in my childhood was just education or just seeing representation, and without making that too big, I just think it's important to have examples, and that just kept bumbling in my mind as I was making just movies and commercials. And within that narrative I thought, what if I could tell a story really early in the timeline of people that are consuming creativity. And one of my triggers in that was, of course, becoming a father myself a few years ago. And that's what made me lead to, what if I completely disregard all these things I do in the moving image, where it's very much about funds and getting a lot of money and really being personal, and really just start writing a really tiny story. So I just started writing a lot of short stories which were never meant for the moving image. And well, long story short, one of these short stories, which is actually from my personal experiences I'm half African, half Congolese. And I was in my neighborhood back in the day, I was the only one with a big afro. And that was always funny in classrooms. And I thought, what if I write a story about that for the youngest audience possible? And that turned into a children's book, Itje wil niet naar de kapper, which translates, Itje doesn't want a haircut. And it's actually just a fun, playful children's book. Without the commercial urgency that or the personal urgency and the commercial audience seeking that the other things have, but just trying to find a way to translate my creativity to different audiences. And in this case, I could find an audience from my own personal childhood that can then seek representation in, well, you have a children's novel now in stores that looks like someone you don't usually see in children's novels, and that was really great to do. So yeah, that's my story, and I think it's interesting for me if we can have a conversation after your introduction about how these different disciplines can enforce each other, because that's really, I've learned a lot of things
exactly
about navigating these two.
about.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, good.
Just want to know, did the book sell?
Yeah, it's actually yeah. There's a plot twist to this story that I would like to say, but yes, it's to my surprise, it's going really well because it's with a little publisher. It's very personal, but I'm just happy that it's finding a place. Wonderful. Because it didn't come from an energy that it had to find a place.
Great, congratulations on that. So, like you were saying, we still have Miguel too to introduce. Miguel Lopez Beraza, ladies and gentlemen. He's a documentary filmmaker, screenwriter, and he's a disaster relief architect. Mind blown. Explain yourself, please, Miguel.
Yeah, so can you hear me? Yeah, so by chronological order, it started with architecture. I try to specialize in natural materials. So I focus in building with earth, which in Spain was very, well, it's our traditional architecture that we are losing more and more. And after that, I wanted to increase knowledge on building with natural materials, and I got a grant from EU for studying tropical architecture, and I moved to Indonesia for 2.5 years, 3 years. There I specialized in building with bamboo, with wood, and tropical systems. And in the meantime, I did a small documentary with a DOP I met randomly in a bar. And to my surprise, it kind of went well, and also got me a grant to study documentary filmmaking. Just before that, the Merapi volcano and the city I was living in Yogyakarta, in the island of Java, erupted, and they needed volunteers to build back all the houses that were affected by the ashes that they move very rapidly, and like 300 degrees Celsius, so all the houses that were nearby were affected. Mm-hmm. So there is where I got my first post-disaster assignment, and since there, usually to get into post-disaster architectures, you have to be in the wrong place, in the wrong moment, and then you build up a bit of experience, and that leads you to other disasters when you could help, and then I work on that in Southeast Asia for a while, and then I jumped into the world of studying a documentary masters in Europe, which I enjoyed a lot, and there started the moment of trying to mix both of them, right? Yeah. Luckily, the first works I started doing were working well, and that allowed me to keep on doing documentaries. And I really like listening to you guys. It makes me wonder how much actually both things are getting influenced to each other. Like I have one clip of a trailer of a film that I shot during the masters. Right after coming from the Philippines, after the Typhoon Haiyan, and if you want, we can play that now. Yeah. Yes, let's. So this project is entirely shot in a thermal camera and was done in cooperation with the Center of Statistics of the city of Brussels, where we try to gather enough information to create the average male in the city of Brussels, like from which car he's driving, the amount of sexual intercourses he would have, and so on. And I think like on the work I've been doing so far, I try to explore the ways we're trying to do documentary and what should be called a documentary and not, which is always a continuous debate. When are we moving into something that is more fictionalized? How should we label it? In this case, the project started when we were thinking in how we can use as like statistics and data that comes from real people to create something fictional. And like the result is because I think the reason why I went for this project at this specific moment was for the city of Brussels itself. And after coming from Philippines, it was a bit of like in Tacloban, where I was staying, where the typhoon hit. The situation was a bit chaotic, and life was everywhere. And contrast, when I arrived to the city of Brussels, everything looked like so much in place that kind of get me like this airport feeling. And then I felt like I would like to do something that that has that coldness. No, I'm trying to figure out why I choose the projects and in which moment emotionally I am. I'm trying, because of this talk, I'm trying to get the connection between one thing and the other. And then I think since then the works I'm trying to do are moving into questioning how we deal with the people we work in documentaries, what is behind, why they choose to sit down with us and spend some time, why people has the need of telling their story, and trying to reveal some things that sometimes we tend to hide in documentary, like how we even construct the story of the life of a person, how we decide to structure that we are going to shoot someone in the morning, going to the job, and how we, through the editing and through the process of, we create a fake feeling of a fiction of the life of someone. And I have a short extract of the film that I did after.
Las series Esmena, fabricadas por Lomo en la Unión Soviética, fueron diseñadas para ser baratas y accesibles al público. Este modelo, la Esmena M8, salió de la cadena de montaje de Leningrado hace 36 años. 261 gramos, cuerpo de plástico y los mínimos mecanismos posibles, pero la Esmena M8 esconde una pequeña joya, su triple lente de cristal revestido, la causa de su especial contraste y saturación. Entre los usuarios de las Esmena se encontraba Lee Harvey Oswald, el supuesto asesino de Kennedy. A los 2 días de su arresto, al desplazarle de una cárcel a otra, fue asesinado. Todo esto me hizo fantasear cuando descubrí dentro de la cámara una película usada de al menos 30 años de antigüedad. En un arrebato de romanticismo, decidí que conservaría la película sin revelar.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Első rész. Szia Sándor, én vagyok, Miguel. Úgy döntöttem, ezen a hangon a te nyelveden szólok hozzá, így jobban megértesz. Jó ez a hang, nem gondolod? Melegebb, bölcsebb, mint az enyém. Valamit tudnod kell, Sándor. Azóta, hogy a második kamerát megvettem tőled, volt egy tervem, hogy a kameráik segítségével filmet készítek rólad. A legegyszerűbb és legtermészetesebb utat választottam. Az életed egy napját fejletekre döntottem, amik bemutatják a különböző tevékenységeket, pillanatokat a napodban.
So Sándor is a second-hand Hungarian camera seller in the outskirts of Budapest, and in a way I was for a while trying to do a documentary about a person where I can actually explain the process and how I was going to portray his life, making him and make to the audience as well understand all the things that you actually don't used to show when making a portrait of someone. And for me it was perfect, or a very good metaphor, to use his own cameras as a way to access. And I also wanted to, I really like the miscommunication, like the fact that he couldn't speak English, I cannot speak any Hungarian. So all the things that were going to go wrong, and so in those things during the film, is I think is entirely done out of mistakes. And but in the end, through all the mistakes, you get a feeling about the guy, and towards the end of the film, you understand that actually, the very end, what it intends to portray is why people accept to enter in doing a film with someone that doesn't know, that doesn't speak your language, and it's about the feeling of trying to share your story, your life, or making your life more meaningful, or loneliness, and it's something that sometimes we hide as filmmakers and documentary filmmakers, and and trying to connect it. I think that since I'm working in many different countries, and the miscommunication is a problem that INGOs have a lot when arriving with a Western perspective into different communities. And it's more and more lately that in architectural projects is trying to understand that architecture is probably just a 10% of the project, but doing a proper work of sharing information and horizontal speaking and trying to understand where the people want to, what the people want to achieve, and so on. So I think that also miscommunication is something I try to include a lot in the works I've done so far. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's jump into the subject of this multifaceted. I have a little reverb here. I don't know if that's okay. Okay. Because the reason we invited the three of you is because of the different roles you play in life. So I was wondering, when you look at yourself, what do you call yourself? What is your job title, Michael? No, you start. Yeah.
No, I think for me it's the easiest if I listen to these stories, because at the end of the day, everything I do comes from an idea, and then an idea becomes a story. Mm-hmm. And 80-90% of the time it's in a visual, it's a movie or it's something else, and these 10% now suddenly has become like really capturing the imagination of children. I've extended the work of the children book into finding even more ways to inspire youth, and I've started building up a workshop program with also with people from the Film Museum, and then I'm thinking, this is not directing, but somehow it keeps feeding me and keeps inspiring me. So yeah, what's the title? I don't know.
You don't know. Well, what you're doing, in fact, is you're making your audience of the future.
Yeah,
you're capturing them now, so they'll watch your films later.
I think that's fascinating.
That's very smart of you.
Yeah.
And how about you, Ashley? How do you see yourself, or how does the outside world look at you as this multi-whatever?
Oh, man. Well, for the past few years, I've been calling myself a speculative neuroscientist.
A speculative what?
Speculative neuroscientist.
Yeah.
So sort of like looking at speculative storytelling, but also trying to ground it in research and science. And so I guess I'm just trying to encourage bridging conversations between artists and creators and scientists, and have gotten some opportunities to do this at universities and really like think about how you do cross-pollination. Like, how do you actually make it work?
Well, I think you of the three are the most diverse in one person. So I do wonder, how does that neuroscience that you were trained for, how does it affect your thinking when you're making films?
Well, when I'm making films, I always want to put in, like, how can we make someone kind of see our way of thinking? You know, it seems a little manipulative, but like, how do you...
But film is manipulative, yeah.
What is the best way to get an emotional response out of someone?
So give me an example.
I guess, like, for me, immersion, that's why I'm so attracted by VR, because, you put a headset on someone, and for however long your experience is, you have that person's undivided attention unless they decide to take it off or disengage. So, they're looking around, and if it's done well enough, it's hard to discern whether you're in this room or whether, you're in outer space or you're somewhere else, because the filmmaker has like captured all of those senses.
So you're using the tricks of the brain that you studied to come to a certain effect with your audience.
Yeah, to have a connection with the audience.
A connection, you call it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you, Miguel?
Well, I mean, I think this thing of it depends on the context, right? Like, and it depends the amount of time you spend with people. Sometimes for me, it's easier just to refer to myself when I'm in a festival, for example, as just filmmaker. And that's why this is great. You can just like coming out of the closet and being able to just. But it depends. It depends. Like you know that whenever you are going to introduce, in my case, I know from my experience that whenever I also mention my other profession, it will require then a certain amount of explanations and why is that, why those two different fields. And
so what do you tell people? Because people always want to pinpoint you and they want to say, why do you do two things? So what do you tell them?
I would love if I had a kind of a life plan. I admire people that have these life plans that they just head to something and they just pursue it and achieve it. But I think that in my life, I just jump into two things I loved.
But that confuses people.
Yeah,
it pisses them off too.
Yeah.
So what do you say?
At the same time, it's easier to target you or remember you. Who's that guy? Yeah, the guy that also do
the guy that does all those things.
Stuff. Yeah. And yes, at the same time, in the shelter context, in the post-disaster architecture context, when you are in missions somewhere else, it also comes when you are confident with the people you are talking with, that you also mentioned that you are working in film, and then it awakes curiosity. But somehow I think I have it as a quite independent two different hats that you wear, and I think that's actually something I like.
So are you telling me that one hat doesn't drip into the other? Do you separate them?
Probably it's permeable. Probably, I'm sure, in a lot of sorts of ways. Like for example, the films I do are very small stories. They're not very dramatic, and probably that has to do because when I'm working in a post-disaster context, there's enough heaviness and drama, and and I look for more. Reduces stories, not documentaries of huge achievements or of huge arch of people dealing with heavy stuff. Actually, I like the difference of it because it just gives you a break. For example, with the festival lives or festival circuits or working on your own projects, it's a lot about yourself and how you project your work, and it's always about the self, right? And also there's a lot of fanciness and cocktails and drinks and presentations, and it helps me a lot to put things on perspective when then I have to, go to Nepal and work on a project for housing there. And it gives me a break that I feel I need.
So it keeps you sane, so to speak.
Within
that world of glitter that you
it helps you to kind of readjust certain values and to what you give accent and importance. And so far it works for me.
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Of course.
I was just wondering for the two of you, because I sometimes run into people who really, maybe it's a bit like you're saying, but they... And I don't know if it's a Dutch thing or
they get confused and pissed off.
Well, I run sometimes in a situation that people just really want. They're saying if you choose one field of expertise, one profession, one skill, you can really excel in that. It's not possible to excel in 2 or 3 or even more disciplines. And I'm getting really inspired by just young creators who do a lot of things. But there is a generation that keeps saying that's only going to devalue the quality of your work. Do you experience those critics, or do you feel that yourself, that you sometimes feel like one is getting in the way of the other?
I don't think so. I mean, I hear what you're saying, especially, within like the sciences. You're supposed to specialize and stick to that. But I think we've seen like over and over that having sort of being a jack of all trades, I guess, it gives you a more well-rounded view of the interconnectedness of things. And I think people are starting to grasp that more of, everything is interconnected. And this even goes back to like environmentalism now. We've like hyper-specialized or tried to segregate things so much and, classify them and put them into categories that we divorce them of those connections. And so I feel like, the work that I do of like trying to be in everything and be interested in everything really helps me to then focus on, that one thing that I want to do. It's kind of like building up to the magnum opus, I guess.
Do you have a vision of that magnum opus?
Right now, I don't know what medium it's going to be in, but yeah, I think I'm working towards it. It has something to do with like how spirituality and technology, you know, connect, intersect. So.
Oh, that sounds really terrific.
Yeah,
keep us posted.
I think I'll know it when I get there.
Yeah, you let us know. Yeah. How about you yourself? Do people ask you to just choose, for goodness sake, so that they are comfortable with you?
Well, at least it's a time thing, and I think in the film industry, they really there are a lot of conventional boxes still, and I think at this edition of the film festival, I went to some different panels, different films. I think it's really cool that now, because it's a broader discussion than these three guys sitting here. I think in the Dutch creative industry, it's also when you're a director, you're a director. Mm-hmm. When you're the screenwriter, you're a screenwriter. And I think the cross-pollination and being multidisciplinary can also be very enriching. Yeah. And to get to my point, now the writing I'm doing is also affecting the filmmaking I'm doing, because I'm becoming a better writer.
And a better filmmaker.
Yeah. I think it's more an older generation that keeps running into that. You need to keep these things separated.
Maybe it's the mediocre people who want you to stay in your corner.
Maybe,
I'm just asking.
I don't know. Yeah, it's every time I look at people that are even younger than me and they're trying out different stuff. Mm-hmm. I do agree that it's great to specialize, but I don't think that means you need to drop other interests, because one enforces the other. When I listen to your stories, I don't understand everything you're doing, but I feel like you guys, one discipline feeds the other, and I think that should be for everyone interesting to have like this second interest. That
I think I agree totally.
There's a hand. Is this
sure, please. Can you just stand up and shout? Thank you.
Yes, shouting. I have a very practical follow-up question, because I understand how all of the things you guys do influence each other and enrich each other, but I do a few different things too, and sometimes they split my brain. Oh. And I don't really know how to handle it. How do you guys?
So do you, the way you're telling us, it feels like you don't like it when your brain splits.
Not always, because I feel scatterbrained.
Yeah, I'm asking, is that a bad thing for you, in your perception?
Suboptimal?
Suboptimal. That's a good way of putting it.
And a little distracting.
Okay, so guys, perfect point you're making. Ashley, does your brain scatter, and do you split your brain? And what happens when that happens to you? Because it could be bad for you and good for somebody else. That's why I'm asking.
I think I hear where you're coming from, but that's why I collaborate with people. So when I'm scattered, they kind of like keep me in check. But all of the things that I'm interested in, I try to find how they connect together, and then I work within that interior space. So I don't necessarily try to go to the extremes of each field, but I, look for the connections, and that's where I want to work in between. So then it becomes more focused.
So from out of the scatteredness, you try to make some sort of sense, and that's a new thing, maybe in most cases.
Yeah, I just heard this filmmaker talking about how when he's editing, he's looking at the spaces between frames, and that's where the story is. Wow. And I guess that's sort of how I feel when you're working across different fields. So I'm not necessarily concerned with things that are hyper specialized within a certain field. I couldn't tell you the latest research that's coming out of a specific part of the brain or something like that, but I know how it works and I know how it fits within storytelling. So that's the space that I'm going to be diving into. I don't know if that.
Great, Miguel.
In a way, I agree with what you're saying. I can feel that in a traditional way of seeing it, having these two works are affecting probably the traditional path of what you can call success. Probably if I wouldn't do post-disaster relief, I would do more films, and if I wouldn't be doing films, I will focus more on that professional side. And I'm rejecting jobs sometimes in the post-disaster sector, and I'm postponing films as well. But at the same time, in a way, I just feel that works for me because of the pressure that both of the films have. And I think that is a fragile balance, but for me, that balance is working. No, the thing with and I don't know, it's maybe specific for the sector, but when you are in a post-disaster mission and arrive, I don't know, after a month when an earthquake has been in a city like Kathmandu, for example, you don't really have that much time. It's very hands-on. Is as soon as you arrive, you have to work in an emergency situation, and you're working 14 hours a day, and it's very intense, and probably it's something that that helps me to keep the brain it creates a contrast with what happens sometimes when you are getting into the circuit of creating a film and going through budget and going through trying to raise the funds and going to pitching sessions and labs and creating a new script and moving it, and which is way more slow and vice versa.
Yeah.
You know,
Which brings me to the question: how does your way of working in the one job influence or affect the way that you work in the other job? I think this is what you were getting to.
Yeah. So now I think that on that balance and that equation I'm trying to make, I figure out that probably for me the thing that is working better is working on the development on the projects. Meanwhile, I'm also combining different post-disaster missions. And
say again?
Like working on the development stage and in labs and things that, and working on the scripts. And when I'm also taking jobs in a post-disaster context. And then when I want to jump into production and shooting, I stop taking those jobs. That's exactly what I'm doing now. No, like for example, in the last 2 years, I've been 1 year, a bit more than a year in Nepal, and in the Dutch Antilles, and in some parts in Caribbean where the hurricane were. And I have some moments between those missions that I can work on the script writing. And now for the next year, I'm not going to take any job on the post-disaster relief to focus on the production on those projects.
Right.
Yeah.
How about you, Michael? Writing is a certain craft, directing is another craft. How do the two influence each other?
Well, to also ties into this question. For me, it's really stress relief, actually, instead of adding stress, because directing is very stressful, actually.
Oh, definitely.
And
yes.
there's because you make a film with a lot of people, and there are 1,000 decisions, and there's never enough money, and then someone's angry, blah blah. So, and then suddenly when you're writing, it's just
you're in your little cabin in the woods.
It's very cliche, but it's just you and letters. And I think that what I've learned was that to stay a little bit sane in the world of the filmmaking, which can be very difficult, I needed something. Apparently, that's what I found out. That is very creative, uncompromising, and there's nobody. You don't need teamwork. You don't need a big crew. And for me, that was these little children's stories, and that's so. Yeah, it's a stress relief for me. I write a lot of stories, and one became this great book, and I'm very grateful. But I have a lot of them in the drawer, just to relax. I think almost, yeah.
And especially children's books. I mean, children's books need to answer to a couple of rules, I suppose. I mean, children need to understand what they're about.
Training as well.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. As a director, does the writing of children's books specifically help you in different storytelling or different directing or different? Does it? How?
The best movies and best stories are a very universal truth translated to a very unique world. And with a children's book, you suddenly have to do that in 10 pages, or at least in my case, it's a picture book. So that's what I like, where illustration really. So you maybe have 200-300 words. And you have to create a universal story that a child wants to grab out of his cupboard every
yes.
So that's a big test. You have 1 hour film, we have 200 words. Let's go.
Yeah.
So it's very nice to train yourself into becoming really good at coming to the essentialism of a story.
That's right.
And learn these practices from my films, and maybe hopefully one day make a great Disney film.
I personally can relate, because I know that my 6 years, I used to read children's news on television in the Netherlands, but those 6 years have formed how I do the rest of everything in my life, is go back to the core. That's what you're saying, and creating that story. How about you, Ashley? How does being this neuroscientist person with your specific way of doing that job, how does it affect the rest of your work or your other work?
I think I bring the research aspect of a project that I learned from science into creative. Like for this project, it went from researching fashion and the history of like fashion as resistance to Afrofuturism, so getting like really deep and granular in it. And I think that that skill set was really built from being like having to read through scientific journals and like being able to pick up on like really small details. So that's what I enjoy doing. However, it's not, you know, it's not me going into lab working on an experiment that may have taken me, you know, months to do and then doesn't work, so then I have to start all over again. This is more of a process where I can see the output of my work.
Yeah.
And have it be tangible. So yeah, it is a form of stress relief because I get to see this thing that I did and put out in the world. So.
And another really practical, and I'm going to come to the room. Just let me finish this one practical question, and then the rest of the time is for you guys. Let's talk about money, because after all, we all need it. We don't like it, but we need it. Having the two jobs, is that a financial thing? I mean, does it help? Does it, having the one job, help you do the other one? That, you know, there's always trouble with money.
I think that in this case, like both of the jobs, like for example, directing for a production house on commercials, that's something I also combine when I'm based in Europe.
That pays for some bills. It must.
That pays for some bills. Okay. It allows you also to stay in Europe, and people for a while can locate you in the map. And also the work with international NGOs is also very well paid. It's a hard expertise to have, and it's a hard situation. So it's also well paid. So I wouldn't say that I go for one or the other depending on the pay, but more on how I'm feeling. No, like because both of them have more or less the same range of payment. It's more on what I feel I'm needed at that moment, and yeah, I guess that's in my case how I'm balancing.
You're lucky, I suppose. In that respect.
Yes. I'm really lucky.
That's good.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. And you, Ashley, is finance in any way a factor?
Well, making big immersive experiences is really expensive, and we're in a period of time where, you know, people are talking about what is the ROI, the return on investment for, you know, virtual reality. So it can be challenging to find funding there, and then beyond that, you know, like we have to take on a lot of commercial work to keep the studio open. So I do that, and I also like consult. So you know, it's like figuring out how to make things sustainable, especially living in a really expensive city like New York. So it's like however you can get your hands on some money, that's what you do.
Yeah.
But if it were about the money, I probably wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing. So it really is about like just interest and trying to move the needle into sort of like innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you, Michael? Money.
I think if it was about the money, I wouldn't have chosen the two most struggling professions of the Netherlands, a director and a writer. No, but no, of course not. No, and the writing just came as a passion, and it rolled into more. And
which pays more bills, though, the directing or the writing?
The directing,
the
definitely.
Directing
yeah, but that's also because I think the benefit in the Netherlands is you have a great creative industry, and maybe if it's not in film, it's in commercials. We have a great commercial industry, and with children's books, I mean, I was actually coached by Mirjam Oldenhaven, and she's a great children's author of Mees Case. For the Dutch people, they might know what it is. And the first thing she said is, "You really like this story? Yeah, I like this story. You really want to write it? I really want to write it. Okay, you're not going to make any money. Okay, let's begin."
That's great.
So apparently, it's strugglers. Children's authors are not very rich.
No,
they don't have Gucci dresses.
Well, let's put it in your no Gucci. In your case, it's the directing that pays for your writing. So it's wonderful. So anybody else ever? Is that a question, or are you telling me 5 minutes to go? 5 minutes to go. Anybody have a question for these three, or for one of the three? Now's your time. Really not? No? Everything was clear? We did a good job, guys. Nobody has a question. So I guess it's time for me to thank you. I thought it was fascinating, and I certainly know where you come from, because I have a job title this long, and then I thought of the title first, and then I started giving it hands and feet. So now I am actually all parts of it. So I do relate to what you're saying, and I wish you all the luck. I think Personally, you might disagree, but I think it's only enriching that you do not focus just on one thing, and your life doesn't necessarily become easier, but it does come damn more interesting, doesn't it? Yeah. So I wish you all the best. Thank you for coming here and talking to us, Miguel Lopez Berasa, Michael Middelkoop, and Ashley Backus Clark. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, guys.